All right, guys, we are back in my garage for another video, and today we are going to be installing the Nostrum Stage 2 B58 injectors. These are going onto my 340i, and these are basically a plug-and-play upgrade, even though they do require some custom settings to work. So we're going to go ahead and install these on my car. It's pretty much similar to how you would just replace factory injectors, but there are a couple steps afterwards, of course, for how you'll make sure that you get this all the way set up. So let's go ahead and jump over to the car and I'll show you how it's done.
Now, as always, for everybody that's new to the channel, I create these videos to help keep you updated on the latest developments in our community, as well as discuss technical topics so that we have a better understanding of how our engines work. So if you're interested in more videos like that, be sure to subscribe because there will be a lot more coming out in the future. All right, so at this point we are ready to install our injectors, and keep in mind there's a little bit of work to get it to this point. Obviously we've removed the shrouds and all of that stuff, the strut brace, so that we can get access to the entire top of the engine. And also I'm installing the Gauntlet high pressure fuel pump as well, so if you want to see how to do that, check out the DIY that's listed in the video description and it'll show you how that pump installs. But basically, follow the same process for every other DIY, spark plugs and anything else. You have to remove all the stuff on top of the engine so that you can access it. And now we are ready to get to these injectors. So the injectors are split into two different fuel rails. So there's one for cylinders 1 through 3, and then another one for cylinders 4 through 6. So we're going to do each fuel rail one at a time. So the first thing we want to do for this front fuel rail is unclip the fuel pressure sensor. You just pop this tab out, squeeze it, push the whole thing in, and then pull it out. And then we're going to unplug basically everything. So we're going to unplug all of these coil packs. Again, pop out the white tab, squeeze it, and pull the connector off. Do that for all of the cylinders. And then if we zoom in here, you can see there is a ground nut. There's actually two, and these are 8mm nuts. So you're just going to remove this, and this is holding the plastic wiring harness bracket onto the fuel rail. So go ahead and take that nut off. And then there's also one right there. The nut is very small, so just be careful to make sure you don't drop it. And then at this point, you should be able to lift the whole thing up. It's kind of clipped onto the fuel rail, so you might have to give it a little bit of a tug. And now with the extra room, we can unplug all of the injectors. So again, just like the others, pop out the little gray tab, squeeze it, and then pull. Yeah. And then once you've got that off, we can loosen this little clamp and then move all that out of the way. Now at this point, there are a couple different options for how you might want to handle this, but we're just going to focus on this front fuel rail for now. So there are 4 bolts holding the fuel rail onto the cylinder head. There's 2 over here around cylinder 1, and then there's 2 over here around cylinder 3. And then there are 6 bolts holding the injectors onto the fuel rail. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is done a bunch of different ways. Some people just like to remove the bolts that are holding the fuel rail onto the cylinder head, and then they just loosen these bolts a little bit on the injector so they can wiggle a little, and then they pull the injectors out with the fuel rail attached so that it pulls all 3 out at the same time. The other thing you can do is follow the OEM tool method, which is what I'm going to show you guys. If you guys want to do it that way, if it's easy enough for you to pull it out with the fuel rail, feel free. Just make sure you loosen these injectors first so they can wiggle as you pull it out. But we're going to do it the OEM way that makes sure we're not putting any weird loads or anything that could damage the injectors when you remove them. So let's go ahead and follow that process. So again, the first thing we do regardless is remove these 4 bolts that are holding the fuel rail on. Also keep in mind these bolts are one-time use from BMW, so if you remove them, you should replace them. And I will put a part number in the video description so you can get 8 replacement bolts for your new injector install. And if I didn't already mention, these are E8 bolts. So grab your E-Torx sockets, and that should allow you to remove these. Now again, if you want, you can simply loosen the screws that are holding the injectors and then try to pull the entire fuel rail out if you don't have the special tool that's worked for a lot of people. But we're going to completely remove these bolts because we're going to pull out the injectors with the OEM style tool. And don't be surprised if after you loosen one side, the other side gets loose. There's actually a bracket holding it onto the fuel rail. So when you loosen one side, basically the bracket falls down and becomes loose as well. So all of the screws will be loose at that point. But one of the screws, at least, the first one that you begin to break free, should be tight. All right, and then same as before, we'll pull these screws out. 2 for each injector. And then we'll lift up the fuel rail. Keep in mind, some fuel is gonna come out, so just be ready. What I'm doing is flipping it over so everything comes out of the one main fuel feed on top of the rail. And that way I can have it all drain into my little rag. Now, in order to use the OEM style tool, the way that this works is, first thing we use is this little piece, and it has this little pin that slides up and down, as you can see. So what you're going to do if you're looking at it in this orientation is you basically put it on in this direction with the pin pointed towards the back of the car. You slide it up, rotate it, and then drop it down. And that should kind of lock it into place so that this is stuck onto the injector. So it looks just like this. You slide it on, lift it up, turn it, and then it should be able to drop down. And now you see it's locked on, and anything that you do to pull on this will pull the injector out with it. So do that for all of the injectors. Now the next part of the kit is using this big bracket. As you can see, it's got 4 attachments, so you can remove 4 injectors at a time. But because we're on a B58, we're only going to remove 3 at a time. And the key thing to note here is you want to line up these holes with the holes that mount the fuel rail onto the cylinder head. So with that in mind, we're basically going to use these back 3 to remove 3 injectors, and then this last one is just going to be hanging out. So basically you unscrew this, it's reverse thread, so you screw this way to loosen it, you screw it this way to tighten it, so back it all the way off. Also, I forgot we need to remove the coil packs in order to get the bracket in place. So go ahead and grab your E8 E-Torx and remove each of these, and then pop those coil packs out. I do like to keep these in as much as possible just because it seals off the spark plugs and everything. And like you saw with some of the fuel leaking, I wouldn't necessarily want that going down the spark plug tube. So we'll keep this off as long as needed and then reinstall it as soon as we can. And now once you've got all of those removed, we're going to use this spacer, and basically you run the screw through the hole, put the spacer through here, and then this screws into each of the holes where your fuel rail would mount. So this is going to kind of be our counter hold to actually remove the injectors. It is a little bit awkward, so just take your time, kind of hand tighten each one loosely. And then once you've got it all actually situated, then we can tighten it all down. Now, while these are still just hand tight, we'll go ahead and screw in these adapters over our 3 injectors that we're removing. And then we'll take the silver pins. These have like a button right here, so that's how you can insert it and remove it into the gold adapters. So push this through, you can press this pin to slide it the rest of the way. And then at this point, what you want to do is get it low enough so it can actually tighten onto the injector adapter. So let's see if we can See that here. There we go. So you kind of see where it's landing on top. So we're lowering it onto the injector. I might need to screw this down a little bit lower. And then once we get it to a good point, we screw the silver piece onto that injector mount. So that will thread onto the bracket that's clamped onto the injector. So we're going to do that for all 6. Now as you tighten it down, you might start seeing it pull the injector up, and if not, you can always tighten this all the way down and then start turning on this big bolt, and that will do the same thing. As this backs out, it'll pull the entire ejector assembly up with it. So it just depends on how stuck in there it is. So yeah, it seems to be doing the job. I think all the injectors are loose. So we'll back these screws off, and then the injectors come out. All right, guys, and here they are. So these are the Nostrum Stage 2 injectors. These are almost ready to go in, but we do need to do a little bit of prep work first. So let's get these ready to go into the cylinder head. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is transfer these brackets from the stock injectors. So this is only locked in because of the orientation. If you turn it 90 degrees, it comes right off. So you can kind of see how that fits on here. And then this locks it into place. So just turn it 90 degrees and slide it off for each of the stock injectors. And then we're going to slide it onto the Nostrum injectors. So they have the exact same feature on this end. You can kind of see the orientation. So again, line it up with the slot, slide it down, and then turn it 90 degrees. Then we're going to go ahead and attach these onto the fuel rail. So just pick which 3 you want for the front half and which 3 you want for the back half. So we'll leave these for 4, 5, and 6, and this will be 1, 2, and 3. Now the way that you set this up is you need to loosely tighten it onto these holes, but it needs to be loose enough so when you slide it into the cylinder head, the injectors can kind of wiggle into place. So that's what this is for. This is going to slide into here and create a space so that you can torque it down evenly, and it's going to leave the injectors loose enough that they can, wiggle into the hole, but it won't be so loose that they'll fall off. So that's the only real purpose of this. You can do it without this, but this just makes sure that you get it right. So we'll use our screws on here and just slide this through the hole. Get it started a couple turns on each side of the bracket. There we go. And then we put our spacer in and tighten it down until it's evenly tight on both sides. And then take the spacer out. And that's basically how you leave each one. So again, it can wiggle so that it can slide into the hole in the cylinder head without damaging anything, but it's not so loose that this bracket will fall off. So do that for all 6 injectors. Now again, just so we understand the functionality of how these injectors are mounted, that spacer is just creating a gap here, but once it's tightened, it's going to suck the injector in and create a nice tight seal between the fuel rail and the injector. So when this is loose, you would have a really bad fuel leak. So once we get it installed on the car, we'll tighten it and kind of suck the injector in so that it's flat and flush to the fuel rail. And that's where your fuel delivery will come through. Now I'll do the other 3 injectors in a moment, but I'm gonna just go ahead and show you that you need to also compress these fuel injector seals, which I made a DIY on before. Again, this also requires a special tool. So I'll have a part number in the video description and a link to what I'm using, but this is what the OEM tool looks like. And it just has a hole right here. And what you can do is put a little bit of oil on the end of the injector And then we're going to slide this on and hold it onto there for 30 seconds. Just keep in mind when you do this, you'll do it on all 3 injectors, and then you pretty much want to take it straight to the car so that the seal maintains its shape. So don't wait a long time to do this process and then bring it over to the car. Do this right when you're ready to install it, and then we'll seat it down onto the cylinder head. All right, so we'll slide this on carefully and push it all the way until it bottoms out. And then we'll just leave it for 30 seconds. All right, and then we'll pull this off. And now it's just compressed a little bit tighter, so it's ready to go into the car. So again, we're gonna do this for every single injector before we actually insert it into the engine bay. All right, so now installation is just the reverse of removal. We'll go ahead and wiggle this into position. Do it nice and slow. Make sure all of your holes and everything are lining up. And then you're gonna get your new fuel rail bolts and slide those into each of the 4 holes so that we can secure it to the cylinder head. Again, just do everything hand tight at first. Make sure all the holes and everything are lining up, because it's kind of a tight fit. And then we're gonna go ahead and tighten these bolts down. There is a torque spec and a torque pattern, so I will put that right here so that you guys can see the exact process. But a lot of this is kind of tedious just to make sure that you tighten it down enough where you won't have any fuel leaks, but you also have to make sure you stretch the bolts because they are one-time use. So there's like 90-degree turns and stuff that you have to consider, but we'll just go ahead and snug all this down and then follow that torque sequence. And then once you have the fuel rail torqued down, next we're going to torque down the injectors. And this is kind of similar to how you tighten your high pressure fuel pump, because again, both of these, like in an ideal world, you would screw them in at the same speed at the same time so that bracket could come up nice and level. So since we can't do that, what you're going to do is a quarter turn on each one at a time, and that will help bring the bracket up flat so it sucks the injector up into your fuel rail. Now these fuel injector screws also have a torque spec, so I will post that here so that you know exactly how tight to make those screws. And then the last thing we're going to do for the injector portion of this install is reassemble all the wiring. So everything from here is basically just the reverse of removal. We'll plug in all of the injectors, and then we'll clamp these grounds back down. So the one that's right here, as well as the one that's up here, reattach those nuts. If you have any issues trying to start the car after this install, this is one of the things to check. I don't know why I always seem to forget it, but I've seen some other people do it as well. And if these grounds aren't installed and secure, then you won't get adequate power to the coil packs in your injectors. So make sure you get these tightened down, and then we can go ahead and plug in all of the coil packs as well. And then we're going to reinstall our high pressure fuel pump with the hard lines and everything. Again, I'm doing the Precision Raceworks Gauntlet pump install, so if you guys want to see that DIY, then click on the video link in the description and it'll walk you through that entire process.
And yeah, at that point, you button everything back up. Again, with this job, I am installing the Gauntlet high pressure fuel pump at the same time. But if you've got, your stock high pressure fuel pump or whatever high pressure fuel pump upgrade you're running, that'll be reinstalled the same as before. So install all of your hard lines, your low pressure feed line, and then you're going to want to go ahead and flash your tune. Make sure you've got the Nostrum Stage 2 injectors set up in your tune, so your custom tuner should set that up for you. And then you're going to want to flash that map before you start the car, because that'll be necessary for it to run properly. Now, after you flash the car and after you've opened the door and stuff, the system should prime a couple times. So go back into the engine bay and just double check all of the connections, make sure there aren't any fuel leaks or anything that you can see. If all looks well, then go ahead and start the car. But again, before you drive, double check and look for fuel leaks. You want to look at all of the connections for the fuel lines, all of the, nuts that screw onto your hard lines and stuff like that, make sure that there aren't any signs of fuel coming out, because that could be a very dangerous situation. And if all is good, go ahead and start driving, run some logs, and get your car dialed in. So yeah, again, we'll be testing all of this out on my car. I'll be pushing it on my 340i with an upgraded Dynamic AutoWorks turbo to see just how much power we can make and what this new fuel system upgrade is capable of. So stay tuned for follow-up videos on that. But otherwise, I think that's it for this video. So thank you guys for watching, and I hope this helps. And if you have any other questions or comments, leave them down below.